The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Talk with NIH, NIAMS, and CSR Health Scientist Administrators, sponsored by ORS New Investigator Mentoring Committee. My name is Lucas Liu, a faculty at the University of Delaware and a member of the ORS New Investigator Mentoring Committee. I will be the moderator of today's webinar. So ORS New Investigator Mentoring Committee has been dedicated to connect ORS young investigators with NIH officers. In every year's ORS annual meeting, the committee organizes a dedicated session for this purpose. In last ORS conference in Vegas, the session was called An Insider Look at Research Funding Opportunities with the NIH. So next year, we will have a similar session. Please check the program book for details when it's available. It will be a nice opportunity to talk with the NIH officers in person. So please be aware that this webinar will is also being recorded and will be posted on the website. All webinar participants will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions box in the menu located on the right side of your screen. We will address the questions at the end of the presentation. In today's webinar, we have two wonderful speakers from NIH and CSR, Dr. Gail Lest and Dr. Daniel McDonald. Both of them have extensive experience about NIH funding and the review process. Our first speaker will be Dr. Lest from NIAMS. Dr. currently a program director at the NIH NIAMS in the Division of Musculoskeletal Diseases. Before joining NIH in 2001, Dr. Lest received a doctoral degree in pharmacology from Medical College of Virginia, following a postdoc fellowship at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She joined the faculty there and achieved the rank of professor in the Department of Orthopedics. She was a co-recipient of the N. Donner von Carpadera Award for Excellence in Orthopedic Research in March 2000 for work on ligament growth and development. She has over 60 peer-reviewed publications from this segment of. Dr. Lester currently manages the NIAMS portfolio on clinical osteoarthritis and diagnostic imaging. She also serves as the project officer for the Osteoarthritis Initiative, a public-private partnership that supports a longitudinal cohort study focused on knee osteoarthritis and the discovery of biomarkers, and as project director on the Foundation for NIH Biomarker Consortium Bone Quality Project, an industry-supported initiative focused on discovery of better surrogates for bone fracture. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Lest.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Lucas, and thanks to the ORS for putting this webinar together. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of the NIH and grant mechanisms that I hope will be very helpful to all of you. The NIH is the steward of medical and behavioral research for the nation. It is comprised of 27 institutes and centers that provide leadership and financial support for biomedical research. The NIH public health mission is to enable the discovery of new knowledge that leads to better health for the nation. As such, the NIH supports peer-reviewed scientific research at universities, medical schools, hospitals, and research institutions throughout the United States and overseas, and in its own laboratories. Additionally, the NIH funds training for research investigators and develops and disseminates credible health information on scientific discoveries. Oh, sorry, that was my first one there. Okay, so this slide roughly illustrates the structure of NIH. And by the way, if you can't hear or there are any problems with the audio, please send a message to Yola through the webinar. There are two major components: the intramural component and the clinical center, which represents about 10% of the NIH budget, and the extramural research program that is the funding to the external community and represents about 80% of the NIH budget. Today we're going to focus on the extramural funding, and that is the funding to the research community. This process is carried out by trained employees of the NIH who are shown in these little circles, who oversee the receipt and review and the scientific review, the Center for Scientific Review, the funding and financial management and the grants management components of the institutes and centers at NIH, and the scientific oversight and management of approved research applications, and that's the scientific programmatic areas of each of the research of the institutes and centers at NIH. And this is where the funding opportunity announcements are generated, and each of the ICs has, institutes and centers has specific programmatic descriptions. So who does what at NIH? And I've just given you a little bit of an overview, but this slide provides a bit more detail. Some of the specific duties are listed here for the members of the staff of the Center for Scientific Review. They are in charge of receipt, referral, and review of all grant applications. They assign the applications, but they do not fund grants, the Center for Scientific Research. And Dr. McDonald will give you more information on that in the second part of this webinar. The NIH institutes and centers carry out the secondary review of applications, which we'll discuss later in my talk, make the funding decisions, manage the applications that are funded, and provide oversight. Now, the application process at NIH has 3 cycles in timing. And you can see that these 3 cycles correspond to the submission dates. The first cycle, is here. Starts in, submissions are due in February or March. Then they're followed by the review process, the council secondary review, and the funding, as you can see in the red bar. And the second cycle starts with submissions in June, July, and then the third cycle in purple starts with submissions in October, November. And you can kind of see the differences in these, but generally submission of these applications takes, our processing of the application from submission to funding takes between 8 and 9 months to occur. This slide shows you a number of links to NIH websites that have very important information for new investigators, and the top part are more information on how to get started, how to get registered, what type of processes you need, information on new investigator status, and some grant writing tips. The second half is our links to the NIAID website, where they have a wonderful tutorial on grant writing, and even have posted some annotated grant applications, giving you an idea of what the structure of an application should look like. So these are very good resources and tutorials for a new investigator. Well, at NIH we have 2 basic types of applications. These are either solicited or unsolicited. An unsolicited application is also known as an investigator-initiated application. this is the majority of the NIH applications that are received and funded. And these are submitted through a parent solicitation, which is for standard mechanisms. These are what we might call generic submissions. So a solicited submission would be one for which there is a funding opportunity announcement. So an institute or center is interested in a specific topic coming in, research related to a specific topic or a specific disease or a particular type of application. And these on the next slide, you can see that they're listed at the grants.gov website. And you can find these solicitations. You can sign up for an announcement of new funding opportunities to be sent to you with the weekly NIH funding opportunity notices. And all the FOAs at NIAMS can be found at the very bottom link that's shown on the slide. So most of you on the phone probably are new investigators. So I will spend a minute or two here on this slide talking about what a new investigator is and what determines new investigator status. This is a very important component for you to know about because there is a section on the face page and there are sections in the application where you are asked to identify yourself if you are a new investigator. This is very important because a new investigator is entitled to some advantage during the review process where the applications are clustered together, and some advantages at the funding point where new investigators are given an advantage with regard to the pay line, the percentile for funding of applications. So a new investigator is someone who has not previously competed successfully for significant NIH independent research award. So you can have had fellowships or career awards, loan repayment, many other small mechanisms, but not an R01 or any type of P01 or major independent research application. An early stage investigator is a new investigator who is still within 10 years of completing his or her terminal degree or completing a medical residency. The early stage investigator is important in some cases with regard to training, and some of the mechanisms might be restricted. And so if you see the term ESI, you know that that's not just new investigator, but does require you to be within the 10 years of your terminal degree. And that is very important for everyone to understand. So if you have any questions, save them for the end and we can talk further on this. So one of the things you will probably ask yourself, or maybe have already asked yourself, is, what's the right mechanism for me? What should I submit for my first application? And how do I determine that? So this slide gives you some bullets that tell you what the factors that are most important are for determining what mechanism to use for your first NIH application. So where you are in your training, what you need for your career, whether you have a mentor who will support you and mentor you and train you further. What do you want to do? How much time and money do you need for your research idea? How well developed are your ideas, and do you have any preliminary data? And a lot of this information is also shown at the link on the NIH website. Let's see. So this slide shows the detail. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the mechanisms of training awards. We have pre-doctoral awards for those who are in training. We have postdoctoral awards. We have a number of mentored opportunities, and then even go up to senior science awards. However, I'm going to go through some of the more important for new investigator components of the training in the next several slides. On the left-hand side of this slide, you can see that once you're in your early career, you can start applying for the research project grant mechanisms, or the R's, the R03, the R01, and the R21 mechanisms. And I'll give you a little more detail on those in the next slide. Oops. Okay, so here are some of the details on the research project grant mechanisms. The R01, I think I've mentioned previously, does require preliminary data and is the, I would say it's kind of the lifeblood of an NIH investigator, having one or more R01s in your research program is very, very important. However, we also have some small programs. There's an R03 small research grant. Unfortunately, at this time, NIAMS does not participate in this program, but it is available with other institutes and centers, $50,000 a year direct cost, 2-year maximum, not renewable. And then the R21, which is a high-risk, high-reward exploratory grant, usually is expected to be somewhat groundbreaking, potentially high yield with results. It's $275,000 over 2 years and then not renewable. We don't recommend this to new PIs, but many new PIs do use this mechanism. So you can see where those fit in. So now I'm going to take a few minutes just to cover the various training mechanisms, and I have 3 slides on these. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but you can come back to these and look at them at your leisure. I just want to give you a little bit of an overview. So the F31 mechanisms are, F31 and F32 are for the pre- and postdoctoral fellowship awards. These require U.S. citizenship or permanent residence for applicants. The duration for the pre-doctoral is up to 5 years, for the post up to 3 years. The stipends that are listed here may not be up to date. They vary with the cost of living and with policy at NIH. So if you're interested in these, you need to look and see what the actual stipends are for these on the NIH website. But these are available for pre-doctoral and postdoctoral training. Once you're in your early career or your research associate, you can start thinking about, you've completed your doctorate, you're thinking about whether you need more training. Do you have time with your current position to do research? And we have a series of K mechanisms that are available for investigators who are looking for this additional training. The K1 Mentored Research Scientist Development Award is probably the most broad, and it accepts a whole variety of degrees and types of research training in the K01. It does again require citizenship or permanent residence status, and it is important to need protected time and to have a mentor who can help you extend your capabilities of becoming an independent investigator. The K25 is also a mentored award, does have the same requirements with regard to needed protecting time, U.S. citizenship or permanent residence status, does have the same time frame, 3 to 5 years, 75% effort. And this is particularly for people who are trained in the quantitative sciences to transition into the biological and biomedical sciences. The K08 and the K23, which is on the next slide, are 2 awards that are particularly designed for those with clinical doctorates who need mentored research time, either the K08 in basic science or the K23 mentored career in clinical science. So both of these awards are for people with clinical degrees, and they provide the same, very similar to what the K01 and K23 do with regard to 3 to 5 years, 75% effort. And with all of these, there is a small research stipend also available. The final K mechanism I'm going to talk about now is the K99R00, or the Pathway to Independence. This is to facilitate the transition of outstanding postdoctoral candidates from mentored to independent research positions more rapidly. The duration is up to 2 years of mentor training and then 3 years with a research project award that is prepared and submitted at the time of application. This award is highly competitive. It requires the candidate to project research direction and to prepare a small R01 as part of the application. So let's do a little summary here. The statement of the career goals is important and required. Commitment from the mentor and the candidate is required with these applications. Letters of recommendation attesting to the potential of the candidate to develop into an independent scientist, and some type of institutional support is also important. So the take-home message for new PIs is that the K series is important if you want a mentor. K99R00 is not designed to bypass the citizenship residency requirement, but is really a great mechanism for outstanding postdoctoral candidates who want to facilitate a more rapid transition to independent research. So now I'm going to just give you a little bit of an idea of what the secondary review process is. To complete the grant cycle, and Dr. McDonald will cover in depth the peer review process, which is described here. But the second level is after the review process has occurred, the application is returned to the institute, and applications with outstanding scores will be considered by the Institute Scientific Advisory Council at their meeting, and then funding recommendations from the council are made to the institute director. And who makes these final decisions? Well, the institute director or the center director makes a decision based on the following factors after the recommendation of council and the program director. And those are the scientific merit, the contribution to the mission of the institute, the programmatic balance within the institute, and the availability of funds. So this last slide is just a little diagram, cartoon, showing you who you need to talk to when. So if you start over here in the blue part, when you're first thinking of your ideas and getting things together, you can contact a PO or a program director or program officer at an institute and the scientific area of your interest and get advice on grant mechanisms, study sections, and get some ideas about budgets and how budgets are put together. You also need to be in communication with your grants office to ensure that they're ready to help you submit. Once your application is submitted, then it becomes the kind of property of the Center for Scientific Review, and the SRO who your grant is assigned to would be who you would talk to at any point regarding the review process or sending in supplemental information or any other questions you have. Once the peer review occurs, you will get your summary statement, and it will either be scored or not scored, and Dr. McDonald will talk about that. And then the application is, as I said, returned back to the institute. At this point, once your summary statement is out, you would contact the program director or program officer for discussion about revisions or possibility of funding. If your application is selected for funding, the program director would serve as your advisor for scientific questions and concerns, and the grants management office would process your funding award. So that's all I was going to present. I know it was pretty fast, but I hope it's given you a little bit of an overview of how this process works, at least from the program director point of view. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. If you have questions you would like to email me or call me with, you're welcome to. My contact information is here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lester, for sharing your insight with us today. So if you have any questions, please click on the questions box in the menu on the right side of your screen. You can type your questions there, and we will answer them at the end of this seminar. Our second speaker today is Dr. Daniel McDonough. Dr. Daniel McDonough is a Scientific Reviewer Officer, SRO, in the Center for Scientific Review of NIH from 1975 to 1986. Before joining NIH, he was a research faculty member of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and directed the Orthopedic Research Laboratory. His group conducted morphological and biochemical research evaluating aspects of normal growth and development of musculoskeletal system associated disease and degenerative conditions. For the past 29 years since joining the NIH Division of Research Grants, now CSR, Dr. McDonough has formed and coordinated the efforts of 5 different standing study sessions, which collectively have assessed the research pertaining to aspects of normal and diseased kidney function, water and electrolyte balance, and mineral metabolism, normal and clinical aspects of entire musculoskeletal system in terms of physiological and bioengineering principles, and many, many other fields. In addition to his review responsibility from 1998 to 2008, Dr. McDonough served as a chief of 2 CSR integrated review groups, or IRGs, the Musculoskeletal, Oral, and Skin Sciences, MOS IRG, and the Renal and Urological Sciences IRG. In this capacity, he oversaw the review activities of a dozen SROs who covered these diverse scientific areas. At present, he manages the skeletal biology structure and the regeneration study session, as well as various MOS-related special emphasis panel reviews. Thank you for joining us, Dr. McDonough.
Thank you, Lucas. And let me see, I think I've got the screen on here. So I would first say that Gail did a fantastic job of giving an overview of the NIH process, and this cartoon is attempting to do similar to just give you an overview of the process. She talked about your preparation of your ideas and construction of your application, and then what happens to it once you've done that. And besides touching briefly on our aspect that I'm going to speak about more fully, she went through and described to you what takes place after your application is received and gets initial peer review for scientific technical merit, and then goes to the institutes for an ultimate funding decision. So I'm going to focus on this purple and green area here and try to fill in some of the blanks. There is going to be a bit of redundancy with what Gail already presented, but hopefully you'll find that informative. So a couple slides in the next 3. 2 of them are going to be organizational charts, and why I included them, I think they're valuable for you in your understanding of what happens or how you might make some decisions when you're submitting your grant application in terms of where your application is going to be ultimately considered for funding and where your application is going to be sent for the initial peer review. So NIH here is composed of 20 institutes and 6 centers and the National Library of Medicine. These all don't include the Office of the Director of NIH. All of these elements that I'm circling right now, which are everything but the bottom 3, have funding authorities. The bottom 3 do not. And the other thing that I would point out to you here is with the diagram, you notice the bottom 3 have a direct line to the Office of the Director. They're independent from the individual institutes, which all have their own entity. They're all created and funded by Congress. Center for Scientific Review, which is where I'm part of, is, as I say, independent, and that's for a reason, because it's intended that the initial peer review for scientific technical merit be independent from the other considerations that the individual institutes and other funding elements are going to utilize when they finally make a funding decision. So proceeding then, talking about the Center for Scientific Review, I should say one other thing back here, that what I'm going to be focusing on pretty much from here on out is the Center for Scientific Review, largely because we handle the bulk share of the review that takes place at NIH, and Gail mentioned that already. Approximately 75% of the applications ultimately are managed by CSR staff for the initial peer review process. That said, most, if not all of the institutes have small review branches that will handle the evaluation of certain types of applications. In many cases, it's the larger applications like the program projects, center grants, and whatnot, but also some of the training grants. In NIAMS case, they also manage the small grant program, the RO3s. And I say RO3s, Gail mentioned RO1s. Of course, if you notice, looking at the actual write-up for those particular granting mechanisms, it's actually a 0. But long before I started doing this job, which means back in the dark ages, or maybe they were the enlightened ages, somehow along, it was more convenient to call it an O rather than a 0. So that's how it's still referred to this present day. Anyhow, getting back to the program at hand here. The Center for Scientific Review has two fundamental roles to play. It is the central place for the receipt of all applications coming into the NIH for funding consideration. CSR and the division, CSR is broken into, and you'll see this in the next slide, at least part of it. Organizationally, we have 7 divisions. The Division of Receipt Referral is where all the applications originally arrived for distribution. Applications from several other public health service elements actually also come to the Division of Receipt Referral for redistribution as well, but we're going to focus on what's coming to NIH. So applications come in, the Division of Receipt Referral, its job is to sort out those applications and give them assignments for both potential funding consideration, so they give an assignment to 1 or more institutes or centers for that purpose, and they make an assignment to a scientific review group, and I'll show you while they come to make that determination. Ultimately, one's application can be assigned to more than one institute for potential funding consideration, but the initial peer review is only done by a single scientific review group. The other, besides the division of support services within CSR, the other 5 divisions are all science-based. And within those, there are in excess of 240 scientific review groups that are set up. Probably over 200 of these are standing study sections, which I'll refer to in a moment a little bit more. The remainder of them are special emphasis panels. The standing chartered study sections are held on a recurring basis 3 times a year, corresponding to the cycles that Gail mentioned before as far as the application submissions. The special emphasis panels are set up on a as-needed basis, and we have a need basis every round. There are reasons why we assign applications to those panels, and I'll mention that briefly as I go forward. These are the types of applications that will be and are reviewed within these study sections. Gail mentioned the research grant applications, the traditional R01, R01, which is the major grant mechanism, but R21s, R03, R21s, which are the exploratory grant mechanism, the R03s, which are the small grants, which I mentioned briefly, the area applications, Academic Research Enhancement Awards, which are the R15s, and of course the whole set of small business applications, which are in the R40 range, R41 through 4. Okay, so moving on to the other organizational chart. This is just a quick view of the 5 divisions that deal with the management of the review within CSR. Taken collectively, this covers the broad spectrum of biomedical research that is submitted to NIH for funding consideration. There are 25 IRGs, integrated review groups. Within any individual IRG, it's composed of probably somewhere between 7 and 10 standing study sections that are each populated and managed by a scientific review officer. There are also special emphasis panels that are set up by virtually all of these IRGs as well. So I'm coming back to the first part of this, and that is the assignment of your application. And as I mentioned, the Division Receipt and Referral will assign your application to an institute or center, and that's for the ultimate funding consideration. The Division Receipt and Referral makes that assignment based on information that's provided by those institutes and centers as far as what they perceive their mission to be in programmatic mandates. The Division Receipt and Referral also will assign applications then for the initial scientific peer review. It is assigned within CSR first and foremost to the integrated review groups. That's why I showed you their existence. Now, once these assignments are made and the application for peer review is assigned to an IRG, then within the IRG, the application is ultimately assigned to a specific scientific review group. A scientific review group is either a standing study section or it's a special emphasis panel. The standing study sections are constructed, have guidelines for their constructions, overall mandates, scientific purviews. All this information about individual study sections, standing study sections, is available on the CSR webpage. You just can go in there. There's a wealth of information on that page or off of that page, and you can get a sense of what each and every study section generally manages the review of. Special emphasis panels are constructed when either the material that's being submitted doesn't fit well within a standing study section, or there's some other issue, a conflict of interest with a study section member or whatnot, that would require the application to be excluded from a standing panel. Also, I should add that fellowships and area applications and small business applications are all managed in special emphasis panels. This leads to one of the proactive activities that you can engage in as you're sending in your application, and that is the submission of a cover letter. Every applicant has the right and is encouraged to include a cover letter with their application submission. This gives you an idea of what that cover letter can contain and can't contain or shouldn't. So in your cover letter, after identifying very briefly what your project's about, and I mean briefly, it can be a sentence or two, does not have to be your application text, you would also indicate in there any suggestions you might have for potential funding assignment consideration, i.e. to the institutes or centers, as well as any suggestion that you might have to give to the center or to Division Research Receipt and Referral for assignment to a specific study section or scientific review group. How would you know this? Well, you would know that from looking up that information with respect to the institutes. As far as their mandates, you would look on the individual institute web pages. They provide that information very clearly and upfront. And for study section assignments, as I mentioned, you'd look at the CSR webpage and look up information about the various study sections that exist. Another bit of information you can include on your cover letter is identifying people that you believe might be potential conflicts to reviewing your application. besides listing them, you would also want to give at least some kind of information that would be helpful to the SRO to know why you're including them. Because ultimately we're going to have to sort that out and make a decision. If you just list a handful of names in your cover letter and there's no other information provided there, then it's really not very helpful to us, and it's not necessarily going to be very useful in the ultimate assignment of application recruitment assignments. The other things that you could include on your cover letter here is, as noted here, identifying areas of expertise that you think might be most appropriate to be brought to bear in the assessment of your project. The thing you do not want to include are actual names of individuals who you want to be reviewers. That's just not required, not desired, and so please don't include that. And here's a link that can give you more information about constructing a cover letter. All right, so I went through that process of your initial receipt and a bit about its initial assignment. So now I'm going to focus most of the rest of my attention here on the actual study section activities. What are study sections? Study sections are groups of scientists, extramural scientists, for the most part, that have been recruited by a scientific review officer. That individual has a doctoral level experience, education, and in many cases, and maybe most cases, those individuals have been in academia before they've come to CSR to adopt a new career in science. A study section, individual study section, a standing one in particular, is composed of a collection of individuals from the community who have committed themselves to being members, regular members, for generally equivalent to a 4-year term of service. And in addition, there are individuals that are recruited by the SRO at each meeting that are ad hoc or temporary individuals who are brought onto the panel to augment the standing membership and provide necessary critical mass of expertise in various areas. Because clearly with 12 to 20 some odd individuals, when we have workloads that are here in this range, anywhere from 50 to well over 100 applications, there's a need for a considerable number of individuals to assess the science and not be completely overwhelmed with the workloads that they get. This briefly tells you what the scientific review officer is all about. The scientific review officer, the SRO, is the designated federal official for that panel. That individual is fully responsible for the activities of that group. The individual, besides looking at the applications when they're coming in to make sure they're appropriate for assignment to his or her study section, then possibly the most important activity that they perform is the recruitment, identification and recruitment of individuals who are going to be appropriate, have the appropriate scientific expertise to assess fairly and completely the science that's being proposed. And then assigning the applications to those individuals appropriately so that that expertise can be brought to bear properly. In addition to that function, then the SRO ultimately manages the actual study section meeting activities before, during, and after. And then the main product deliverable, if you will, for all of that activity is then the summary statement that's prepared of the evaluation that you receive as an applicant after the meeting. And frankly, originally, the summary statement, and still to this day, its primary function is to provide information to the institutes and centers who are going to be making a funding decision to give them some sense of the perceived scientific merit of that project. So the activity that takes place before the actual study section meets, the SRO is going to recruit individuals and then is obliged to assign each application to a minimum of 3 reviewers. This gives perceived broad enough diversity of opinion and critical mass of opinion to have a fair assessment of the work. And these assignments are then provided to the people that have been recruited somewhere between 5 or 6 weeks before the actual meeting takes place. After those assignments are released to the reviewers, then they take that information and they proceed with looking at the applications, constructing a preliminary written critique, and providing a set of preliminary scores for the project. The scores are constructed, there are 6 scores that they provide, 5, 1 for each of the core review criteria, and then an overall impact score. And of course, the overall impact score at the end of the day is the one that's going to make the critical difference in terms of determining the overall perceived merit of the project. And that's the number that's going to be used largely by the institutes and centers when they're making their funding considerations. Not the only determination, but it's a major one. At the meeting then, after the reviewers have had the time to prepare their preliminary critiques and whatnot, just before that, they provide information to the SRO with respect to not only their critiques, but their scores. And their scores are used by the SRO to actually set up the meeting and the order of evaluations within the meeting. The SRO is now is setting up the meeting in such a way that each separate grant mechanism is clustered by itself for discussion. And thus, the R01s, if there are R03s present among the applications, and R21s, these are the main 3 elements that are in a normal standing study section, are each clustered separately for a discussion. In addition to that, the new investigator R01s are separately clustered from the R01s that are being submitted by individuals who've already had R01 support. So there's usually 3, or if there are R03s present, now 4 different clusters of applications that are going to be assessed. The order of discussion within any given cluster is determined by the information provided by the reviewers, whereby the initial overall impact scores are averaged from the assigned reviewers and then rank ordered. And the discussions for it within any given cluster then will proceed from the very best application initially determined by these scores. And best meaning a number that is closest to 1. In this process of discussion, as noted here at the bottom of the slide, approximately half of the applications are actually discussed at the meeting. Every application is reviewed, but only about half of them are actually discussed in full. The other half of applications, if there's a unanimous agreement within the panel, those applications are not discussed. They, as you will see in a subsequent slide, will get feedback, but they don't actually have a full group discussion at the meeting time. What takes place during a discussion? This slide tries to give you a sense of that. After any individual who's determined to be in conflict, and conflict generally is an institutional conflict, is asked to leave the room so that they're not privy to what takes place in the discussion. Then the chair, who is orchestrating the actual discussions, will invite each of the assigned reviewers to first give an indication of their initial enthusiasm, and then in a sequential way will invite each of the assigned reviewers to provide their commentary. The first reviewer gives a full presentation, and in fact gives an initial brief orientation for the entire panel of what the project is about. The other assigned reviewers then will add comments with respect to any new issues, or briefly indicate their concurrence with previous comments that have been made. And then after the assigned reviewers have been all engaged in comment, then the entire panel will be invited to ask questions, make comments. This process proceeds at the discretion of the chair until he or she feels that it has run its course and all the pertinent issues have been put on the table. Then the chair will bring the discussion to a close and ask for final recommendations from the assigned reviewers for their levels of overall impact enthusiasm. That will set a rate. I'm sorry?
Sorry for interruption. We only have about 10 minutes left, but we have a lot of questions waiting for us.
Okay.
Could you fast up a little bit?
Yep,
Thank
yep.
you.
I will try to go right through these slides then, just so that ultimately people have a chance to see them later.
Okay, thank you.
So that was the general process. The next couple slides will show you the criteria that the reviewers are focusing on. Of course, you've constructed your application nowadays to try to fit these kind of criteria and respond to them. The other criteria that potentially can impact on your score are listed here. Your use of human subjects or animals can, if not properly articulated, can influence your final score. These other issues that are considered by the reviewers do not influence your score. Large among these is the budget. The budget does not impact your scoring. And this slide and the subsequent slides give you a sense of the scoring scale that the reviewers are actually using. And this slide, which you can ponder later, gives you a sense of how they ultimately come to a number, with obviously the best numbers being here 1 to 3 for high overall perceived impact and so forth. This is another table that does the same thing as the previous one, but has descriptors, if you will, for levels of enthusiasm. And I already mentioned the summary statement. This gives you a sense of what information is provided to whom. Everyone gets this kind of feedback here, which is the relatively unedited critiques of the reviewers and individual scores for criteria. If your application has actually been discussed, you additionally get a resume and summary of discussion at the beginning of the summary statement and budget recommendations. The last two slides are issues that have often been mentioned by or asked about by folks listening to the peer review presentations, and that is, what are the reviewers looking for? As you can see here, they're looking for something that they think is going to be impactful, and that it plays into here. They're also looking for them to really get a sense of how impactful it is. You've got to obviously present your thoughts in a fairly clear way, in a logical way, and that's what these other ideas are mentioning here. And try not to have too many things in your project that would be perceived then, if you notice here on common problems, to ultimately give a suggestion that you don't have an unfocused research plan. So these are some of the issues that play off of the ones that were mentioned in the previous slide. I have a couple other slides that have miscellaneous information on them. It covers some of the places that you can go for additional information to make some decisions in your cover letter. And then, as Gail did previously, here are a list of various resource links. The CSR webpage has an immense amount of information, much more than you ever probably want to know about the peer review process, and I encourage you to go there. So I'm going to end there, and we can open it up for questions. Okay, I'm done. And I don't hear anything. So what is happening?
Hi, Dan. I can hear you.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, there we are.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So we can, due to thanks, Dan. That's really a nice talk and a great information. Due to time limit, we can only address a few questions from the audience. The first question we have is, I plan to study a skeletal muscle change in diabetes, so more likely related to the capacity of a skeletal muscle in generating force and neuromuscular control. So I'm having a problem making decisions submitting my proposal to NIAMS or NIDDK. So Gail, can you or Dan, can you give any comments for this question?
So this is Gail. I'll take a first stab at it. My suggestion would be for the individual to call a program director at either of these institutes, either NIDDK or NIAMS. I really can't give specific information over the phone, but if you talk to the program directors who are in the muscle area at NIAMS or in, was it diabetes? I forgot actually what you said. NIDDK would also be able to talk to you about that. The other option is to write up your proposal and let the Center for Receipt and Referral read over your aims and decide the most appropriate assignment. But I think it would be beneficial in this case for you to talk to program directors.
Yeah, I absolutely.
So I will, sorry Dan, I will jump to the next question. The next question is, I am on my 4th year in tenure track period. Is it too late to apply K25 award, and how many mentors do I need to submit the proposal?
So he said 4th year of what, Lucas?
4th year in tenure track position. So is it too late to apply for a K25 award?
4th year of tenure track, I think is what
you're saying. You know, it's not too late to apply, but there needs to be a reason you need this. And that is, you know, you have a specific mentor in mind and you have a training program that will enable you to become an independent investigator. I would there again suggest you talk with a program director. Here at NIAMS we have someone who is generically in charge of our training program you could speak with, or you could speak with me or one of my colleagues who have programmatic areas in musculoskeletal.
Okay, great, thank you. Gail, and I think the next question is related to Dan's slides. The question is, it looks like the percentile was calculated based on proposal reviewed by a study session. Then the question is, for NIAMS, it receives the referrals and percentiles from different study sessions. What is the mechanism for the institute to make the percentiles received from different study sections comparable, or to make a fair decision? So Dan, can you?
Right, and so it'll chew up much more time than you've got for me to go through an elaborate explanation of it. There is a write-up on the CSR webpage about percentiling, but the shortest answer, I hope, will be that percentiling takes place for each standing study section specifically so as to give us some kind of a normalizing process across study sections. So percentiling is done on R01s only and is based on taking a pool of R01s for the current review round and the previous 2 review rounds and basically rank ordering them, and that gives a ultimate percentiling. You rank order the overall impact scores and come up with a percentile calculation based on the numerator being the application where it's ranking and divided by the total number of R01s for the 3-round period. And when you do that, then it takes out some of the idiosyncrasies of a given study section, and the institutes can have a little bit better chance of comparing across study sections.
Great, thanks, Dan. Here's another question related to the K25 award. So how frequent are the K25 awards to the engineers? I don't know whether any of you have the information in hand.
I don't know what the numbers are, but we frequently, you know, it depends on how many engineers apply. They are open to people with quantitative backgrounds. So if you are a biomedical engineer, maybe not quite such a good justification for that because you already have a lot of biological training in your program. If you're a mechanical engineer or material sciences engineer, certainly that award would be very appropriate for you to apply for if you have a training program that's going to bring you into the biomedical arena. Again, you can talk with program directors. We can help you with that.
Great, thanks, Gail. So due to time issue, we cannot cover all the questions. I guess we have to stop here. It's already 1 o'clock Eastern time. So this webinar will be uploaded to the OIS website in the coming week. You will be notified via email when this recording is available. On the website, you will also find the information about other resources and programming from New Investigator and Mentoring Committee, and including all of our previous webinars. Lastly, upon exiting the webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please do the evaluation and make any suggestions on how we can improve moving forward. Your input is greatly appreciated. And thank you everyone in advance for completing the survey and for joining us today. Thank you to our two wonderful speakers, Dr. Lest and Dr. McDonough, and hopefully to see you all in Disney next year.
Yeah, Lucas, and could I just add, as Gail did, if they have questions, please feel free to email us and we'll try to answer them.
Great, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Gail, again. So this concludes the OIS webinar, Talk with NIH, NIAMS, and the CSR Health Scientist Administrators. Thank you.
Thank you.